Thanks everyone for joining us this afternoon. My name is Lauren Noble, and I'm the founder and executive director of the William F. Buckley Junior Program at Yale. I'm delighted to welcome all of you to our third panel discussion in a series of 5 that we're hosting this week. This event is part of our 11th annual conference on the 70th anniversary of God and Man at Yale. Our subject this afternoon is the important question: can alumni and trustees rescue the American university? Before I introduce our guests for this afternoon, I want to say a few words about the Buckley program. The William F. Buckley Junior Program is an organization dedicated to promoting intellectual diversity at Yale. Throughout the year, we host lectures, seminars, firing line debates, conferences, and much more. Our over 350 Buckley Fellows have a wide range of political beliefs, but they all stand united against the formation of a liberal-only echo chamber on campus. By providing Yale students with a forum to engage meaningfully with serious conservative thought, the Buckley program has become an institution on Yale's campus and a symbol for a more open and more representative political atmosphere, especially at a university where the mission is the cultivation and creation of new knowledge. Buckley Fellows believe that all perspectives must be heard and examined in good faith. You can learn more about the program and how to become a fellow at our website, buckleyprogram.com. We're truly fortunate to have such a distinguished group of speakers with us here this afternoon. Gail Lavielle's career has spanned many years in both the public and private sectors and in many countries. After 26 years in the corporate world, about half that time in France and the other half in the United States, she spent a decade in elected office in Connecticut. From 1981 until 2008, Gail worked in finance, marketing, and communication, holding executive leadership positions in several corporations. As CEO of a French subsidiary of the Interpublic Group specialized in communications and public affairs, she managed the company through a severe recession and doubled revenues while running it for 5 years at a substantial profit. In 2010, Gail was elected to Connecticut's State House of Representatives, where for 10 years she represented the 143rd District, covering parts of the small towns of Wilton and Westport, as well as a section of the city of Norwalk. She left public office in January 2021 after choosing not to run for a 6th term. Gail holds an MA in French from Yale and a BA in English from Cornell, as well as an MBA in finance from the University of Connecticut. As a classical music critic, she wrote reviews for the Wall Street Journal and is the author of a book on opera. Gail serves on several boards, including that of the Buckley program. Michael Poliakoff serves as the president of the American Council of Trustees and Alumni. Dr. Poliakoff became part of the ACTA team in March 2010 as the vice president of policy and became ACTA's 3rd president on July 1st, 2016. He previously served as vice president for academic affairs and research at the University of Colorado and in senior roles at the National Endowment for the Humanities, the National Council on Teacher Quality, the American Academy for Liberal Education, and the Pennsylvania Department of Education. He has taught at Georgetown University, George Washington University, Hillsdale College, the University of Illinois at Chicago, and Wellesley College. He received his BA from Yale University and went on to study at Oxford University as a Rhodes Scholar, and at the University of Michigan, where he earned a PhD in classical studies. Peter M. Robinson is the Murdoch Distinguished Policy Fellow at the Hoover Institution, where he writes about business and politics, edits Hoover's quarterly journal, the Hoover Digest, and hosts Hoover's video series program, Uncommon Knowledge. Robinson is also the author of 3 books: How Ronald Reagan Changed My Life, It's My Party, A Republican's Messy Love Affair with the GOP, and the best-selling business book, Snapshots from Hell, The Making of an MBA. In 1979, he graduated from Dartmouth College, where he majored in English. He went on to study politics, philosophy, and economics at Oxford University, from which he graduated in 1982. Robinson spent 6 years in the White House, serving from 1982 to 1983 as chief speechwriter to Vice President George Bush, and from 1983 to 1988 as special assistant and speechwriter to President Ronald Reagan. He wrote the historic Berlin Wall address in which President Reagan called on General Secretary Gorbachev to tear down this wall. After the White House, Robinson attended Stanford University Graduate School of Business, where he graduated with an MBA. In particularly relevant for our discussion today, in 2005, Robinson was elected to serve as a trustee of Dartmouth College. Regarding the format of today's discussion, each panelist is going to take about 5 to 8 minutes for some opening comments. We'll then have a discussion, and I'll ask some questions of my own, but we also want to hear your questions as well. So please submit your questions throughout the event using the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. So we'll go ahead and get started. Gail, you're up first.
Thank you, Lauren. I'm glad to be up first, considering the accomplishments of my esteemed colleagues here, because I wouldn't want to follow them. Just I think maybe a few introductory remarks on what brings me here, besides being on the Buckley board. I was one of the people earlier this year to have registered in March as a petitioning candidate for the Yale Corporation. And that taught me a great deal about the way Yale is operating now. I don't know how many of you are familiar with that process, but there were 2 ways a trustee could become a member of the Yale Corporation, and one was to be nominated directly by the Yale Alumni Association, and then to be put on the ballot and without any further ado, and also without being allowed to speak of their background or their ideas for what they should do as a trustee. They could not, in other words, campaign or communicate anything about their intentions. Or you could register to petition, and then you had to get 4,500 signatures without any help from Yale on how to contact those 4,500 alumni. And if you got the 4,500 signatures, you could go onto the ballot, and you were allowed to communicate about anything you wanted. And it was quite a strange circumstance. But just as I had finished preparing to communicate when it was time for the petitions to go online, the Yale Corporation, without really any substantial explanation, pulled the petition process and abolished it. And it has been in existence for decades, especially since Yale's charter by the state of Connecticut gives the alumni special status as being allowed to elect their own trustees and so on and so forth. So it was quite strange to see this happen. And the alumni who got in touch with me afterwards, there must have been more than 2,000 who called me and wrote me, were very distressed that they had had their the rug pulled out from under them and their voice taken away. Pardon me. And all of that said, the faculty was also rather disturbed by the move, because the graduate school and Yale College Faculty of Arts and Sciences Senate made a very strong statement opposing this move. There was never any real response that was provided by the Yale Corporation or by the administration about why this happened. The assumptions, though, that many people made were that clearly someone who was controlling this, whether it was the administration or the corporation, did not want anyone with views they had not vetted to be elected to the corporation. And some may say, well, sure, that's the way they've always been. But the question that we couldn't answer was why? What are they scared of? What are they afraid will happen? Are they somehow not convinced by their own views? Do they think that there is wide refusal to accept their views? And would they be criticized for not agreeing with someone who didn't accept them? And we couldn't pinpoint the why. What would motivate a board of trustees to stonewall discussion on any subject, particularly since the minutes from all the meetings are embargoed for 50 years. Nobody is paid. No one would lose their job or lose any particular standing if they were upset with the way their career on the corporation was going. And I don't know how it could hurt the administration either to have an opposing voice. And no one even knew if petitioning people were going to have an opposing voice. The whole thing was very mysterious. But that bigger question still bothers me. I know that many of us have heard or feel or think or have been told by students or what have you that, or we've read stories, that Yale has become very narrow-minded, particularly in the humanities and social sciences, but it also seems that's extending to other disciplines. And there's a worry that, as Lauren said, that there's no room for a diversity of thought. And the question that provokes for me is why? Is there someone controlling things who has such strong convictions that there must be a doctrine, and that doctrine will hold sway no matter what, and that research must be guided by that doctrine, the curriculum must be guided by that doctrine, and was allowed to be said on campus is guided by that doctrine. And what worries me about it is that if that is the case, if there are people in the administration or in the corporation who are convinced that there is such a doctrine and that it should be respected, why is it so hard to talk about it frankly? Because that is a giveaway right there, that something may be wrong or something may be motivated by causes we don't understand. And I'm not suggesting I know what those are, I don't. But it's bewildering. But private university, we're talking about the role of alumni and trustees today. Well, what are their roles if, under the law, a private university may do whatever it wants? And I think that that's one of the basic tenets of our government, that a private institution should be able to do whatever it wants, but it should act in its own best interests. And what is it? Is it itself? Is it a thing? Is it a building? Or is it the people who constitute it? And in the case of Yale, does that include the trustees? Yes. Does it include the donors? Yes. Does it include the alumni? Yes. Does it include students? Does it include faculty? Yes. All of those things are constituent parts of Yale. And Yale is nothing as an institution without them. So I think that when it comes to talking about the role of the trustees, if it's the administration that has to find an admission statement for Yale or a statement of doctrine or whatever, that the trustees should be there to give that a good solid examination and to demand that it be exposed publicly and clearly with all transparency and what the implications are. And unless the trustees are doing that, I'm not sure what they're doing, besides going over the budget and hiring and firing the president and sort of concrete things like that. And I guess we'll discuss the alumni roles as well. But if a university does not trust the thoughts and convictions and logic of its graduates, the people it formed, then something is also wrong. So I think, yes, both of those groups, the trustees and the alumni, do have a role to play here. And it's, again, with frankness, transparency, forthrightness, and clarity that this should be done, and good management. But I guess we'll talk more about that as we go ahead. I just want to say one more word. I'm sorry about my presentation and appearance here. I usually like to be a bit more elegant and less casual for a public discussion, and particularly when it's such an honor to be here for the 70th anniversary for God and Man at Yale. But I'm stranded in New York without all the things I need to do that. So forgive the appearance of the setting and my dress style, and I thank you for your indulgence.
Thank you, Gail. Michael, you're up.
Thank you, Lauren. Thank you for the privilege of being part of this program. I recall as a freshman in 1971 hearing William F. Buckley Jr. speak at the Yale Political Union. And during my time at Yale, of course, we had the shout down of William Shockley. Nobody raised any objection to William F. Buckley Jr., but that prompted the C. Vann Woodward Committee report. And for many years, I was proud of my university as the university that gave the country the C. Vann Woodward Committee report. Now I'm sad to say that sometimes I think of my university as the place of the Halloween Day massacre, rather than that place of vibrant exchange that I remember. So I want to talk really about solutions. I agree entirely with Gail. There's something very disturbing about what is going on. And we need voices in authority, i.e. the corporation, who are willing to speak out. We need transparency. Not being able to get access to the discussions or to know what the votes are is really the prerogative of a private institution, but it's rather disturbing. So let me think about some solutions here. My answer to the question, can trustees and alumni effect the changes and rescue the universities? Yes, we've seen examples of where this has been happening. In general, institutions prize their alumni. Now, it's arguable that that fondness rests because they have an image of them that blurs the persona with a bank account. That the visual would be that the face turns into a checkbook, but there's much more there. Starting with the Wall Street Journal article of October 17th, Alumni Unite for Freedom of Speech, a wave is sweeping over the country with remarkable potential for improving higher education. I'll talk more about that in a moment. Trustees are often a sleeping giant. They, however, hold power over everything that happens at a college and university and the responsibility for it. And if that sounds surprising, it's because all too often, too many trustees don't recognize the gravity and importance of their role, or sadly, they prefer to ignore it. My organization, the American Council of Trustees and Alumni, has been working on both these fronts. And I will say sometimes the boulder slides down as we try to push it up the hill, but lately there's been some encouraging progress. So let me turn to solutions with alumni. Alumni give across the nation $11 billion in philanthropy. So how do we make that useful? We end the blank check. Just say no to the quote campaign for. Let the schools know that our hearts are open, but our wallets are closed until such things as the adoption of the Chicago principles and the application of the C. Vann Woodward Committee report become reality. We can redirect our philanthropy to programs with guardrails. ACTA has a network of what we call oases of excellence, like the Madison program at Princeton, or this one right here at my alma mater. Another example, the Pizzagalli Chair in Free Enterprise at the University of Vermont, on which we advised as they were shaping the gift agreement. A chair in free enterprise in the state of Ben, Jerry, and Bernie. It can be done. Another example, the McNeils, who were graduates of UW-Madison, could not bring themselves to make their gift to the alma mater. So they found a program at Furman, or they created a program at Furman, the Tocqueville program. There are ways that alumni can be very, very intentional and deliberative. And even when we turn to a school with such deep pockets as Yale, alumni engagement is part of the metric for ranking in the US News and World Report. Why anybody cares about that foolishness is beyond me, but they do. And if we as alumni are willing to get together and assert what we believe to be wholesome, and I would say, for example, that adopting the Chicago principles is about as radical as demanding that students in the dining hall be able to get a glass of milk with their meals. If we come together that way, we can have a real voice. Now there is the Alumni for Free Speech Alliance. Charter schools, Davidson, Princeton, Washington and Lee, University of Virginia, and Cornell, and more are coming in. I just want to read what the authors, the founders of this group, Stuart Taylor and Ed Yingling, put in the Wall Street Journal. University trustees, presidents, and other administrators are usually mired in the toxic campus environment, which responds to heresy with attacks. Most have been either cowed or genuinely believe in a woke orthodoxy that sees free speech as an inconvenient disruption. And here's the point: that leaves alumni as the only university stakeholders with the numbers and the clout to lead the defense of free speech. Davidson just commissioned us to work with them on a survey of their major donors and their students. Here are a few findings. 59% of major donors said they were dissatisfied with the direction of the college. This is all public information now. It's on our website. It's on the Davidsonians for Free Thought and Discourse website. 82% want Davidson's culture to be ideologically balanced. 80% want the adoption of the Chicago principles. 41% said they expect their level of giving to decline. And it was recently covered by Doug Belkin, again in the Wall Street Journal. So what are the problems? We wave our handkerchiefs at the reunion and we say for God, for country, and for Yale. And we reflexively reach for the wallet. And we think problems exist at other people's schools. We have a problem. We need to solve it. And we can solve it not with hostility, but with love for our alma mater, discreet and focused love. So I'll turn briefly to trustees, and cut me off, Lauren, if I'm rambling too much. Power of one. And this is where the absence of petition candidates is particularly painful, and why we need to fight to restore that. Wallace Hall was appointed by Rick Perry in Texas in 2011 and started investigating the massive forgivable loans given to pals of the president, Bill Powers, and the preferential admissions. There were bipartisan howls of rage to his investigation and a call for his impeachment, which he certainly survived. But in 2014, the chancellor of the UT system called for the president's resignation, and it came in the following year. The power of one. It was not easy for him. And in 2019, the University of Texas student government passed a resolution in light of the Varsity Blues scandal to apologize to him. I need to send this story to the Yale Corporation. Somewhere, I hope there is somebody who's willing to be that voice. The regents in Arizona organized the Arizona Regents Cup debates, this vibrant program that brings debate, reasoned parliamentary debate on the most controversial topics. It's wonderful to see dozens of students participating in that. On our board of directors, John Altman was a trustee at Miami University of Ohio, his alma mater. They would never adopt the Chicago principles until his family foundation made its next gift conditional thereon. And Miami University of Ohio did adopt the principles. We saw something like this at University of Nebraska. So I could give more examples, but what are the problems? One of them is the little Caitlin problem. That's Amy Wax's wonderful term for it. My little Caitlin is applying to Penn next year. I can't speak out. That's a dereliction of duty. The trustee privilege. I want to be in the president's box at the football game. I want the private dinners. I want to wear the robes at commencement. That's again a dereliction of duty. So what are our solutions? Investigation, public disclosure, if not public shaming. And my earnest hope, because I love my alma mater, is that we can rock the corporation into, at very least, restoring petition candidates. And we can, in fact, get some of these common sense reforms, like joining the 82 other schools that have adopted the Chicago principles of freedom of expression and living by them. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Peter.
Muted, Peter.
There, I'm unmuted. The first thing I'd like to say is, Gail, I'm tremendously impressed. Only a woman who spent 10 years in France would think that her very elegant appearance should be more elegant. I'm a Dartmouth man, so a sweater and a fake background is really the top of my form. Let me just tell a story very briefly about my candidacy as a petition candidate at Dartmouth, and then my 8 years, 2 terms, 8 years on the board at Dartmouth, in brief. We had a petition process at Dartmouth. It required only 500 signatures. As best I can tell, before 2004, when my friend TJ Rogers ran and was elected as a petition candidate, it had only been used a couple of times in the previous century, 80 years or a century. So it was very, very seldom used. TJ Rogers talked me and then another couple of people into running as petition candidates. Very similar rules applied at Dartmouth as applied. You've just heard Gail talk about the rules that applied at Yale. Once you became officially a candidate, you could no longer campaign. But we discovered there was no law against campaigning while you were gathering petitions. So we set up a website, sent out statements. The college, Dartmouth College, refused to help us in any way find ways to communicate with alumni. But a very enterprising young undergraduate went to the library and pulled down the directories for Dartmouth clubs all across America, fed these into a computer, produced a spread. We did reach them. The result of this was that I can't recall, we received somewhat varying numbers of signed petitions. You'd have to read our statement, download an actual paper petition, and then sign it and mail it to us, and then we would have to submit these paper petitions to the college. I'm going through all this paper business because the college made it as cumbersome as possible. Still in all, each of us received in the range of 5,000 to 6,000 signed petitions. At Dartmouth, there are about 60,000 alumni at any given time. So we received something like 10, in the range of 8 to 10, 11, 12% of the alumni body signed our petitions. And now I come to my first lesson. I was a little bit concerned that the people who supported our candidacies might simply be my age and older, honestly. Also that they might be white males, that it would be Dartmouth went co-ed later than Yale. We went co-ed in 71, as I recall, and phased it in very slowly so that as late as my class, 1979, the ratio of men to women was still 3 to 1. And it turned out, of course, that there was a lot of support for our candidacy among white males, my age and older. But to my immense relief, frankly, the support went straight through to the current, most recent classes. We could find no difference. Once you got to the more recent classes where coeducation had been fully phased in, we had women signing, And we also received lots of emails of support from current undergraduates. So the first lesson to me is that this is not unhappiness with the state of these institutions is not limited to old curmudgeons. It's current, it's alive, it's among women and men, people of all races. Okay. So, and incidentally, there were 4 of us who were elected in the spate of a couple of years of elections, one of whom was an African American. So there was some kind of undercurrent of, well, white male, white male, white male. No, we disproved that. I served 8 years on the board. There are many stories within those 8 years. Let me quickly tell you how it ended. Yale shut down the petition process before it got started. In our case, they changed the rules to shut down the process. Honestly, Gail put her finger on something. Why do these people behave this way? What's really going on? And this notion that the Yale Corporation, the trustees of a great institution, are failing to live up to the simple standards of decency and honorable behavior that they would expect undergraduates to live up to. The same thing at Dartmouth College. The board, apart from the petition candidates, began holding secret meetings, and they just enacted, completely surprised us, intentionally misled us as to what they were doing. They just changed the rules to increase the membership of the board so the petition candidates could never achieve more than a third or so representation on the board. Effectively, you just couldn't. Little protests, little decorous protests, perhaps, but actually changing any issue, any real aspect of the life of the college was put out of bounds. We thought that was illegal, and so we sued. And it turned out it probably was illegal, but the plaintiff, this gets very technical, I won't bore you with the details. The plaintiff was the Alumni Council, also an elective body, and the Alumni Council first supported us, and then there was a new election, and by 1 or 2 people, they withdrew the lawsuit, and it all ended because then the plaintiff, now the Alumni Council changed representation, but the same legal entity, asked for the case to be dismissed with prejudice to close off any suits in the future. And so this close to having it decided on the merits, the whole thing was shut down, and the petition process at Dartmouth College ended, except, of course, you're still free to run as a petition candidate, but there's no longer any possibility of bringing any real force or argument to bear on the college. Okay. What did I learn? I learned that the people who were in this process, my opponents, the trustees who were already part of the body, the administration of Dartmouth College, were all good, decent people. We disagreed, but they were good and decent people. That may be worth bearing in mind. I say maybe not to be flip, but because things have changed now. This was all before the Me Too movement and the intense polarization. There is a kind of bitterness and enmity on the scene now, which is new, which I did not experience. And I can't advise anyone, least of all Yale alumni, how to handle that, but it is new and it is different. Two final lessons. One is, to my astonishment, Dartmouth College didn't need alums' money. They didn't need to please any large number of the 60,000, because modern technology, it is now possible to find out in a very fine-grained way how much each of your leading alumni are worth. And it turned out they only needed a couple of hundred really rich liberals to run the place. And that is certainly true at Yale, where you have a sophisticated development office. They'd like support, they'd like goodwill, they'd like warm feelings, but they don't need it. That was a tremendously important, that shocked me, but it turned out to be simply true. 2, 3, 4 liberal billionaires permits you to dismiss 15,000 alumni if you wish to. And if push comes to shove, they did wish to. The second lesson that I learned was that whenever there was an issue that the board managed to keep within the board, they would win. And whenever there was an issue that got reported on, that spilled into the press, they almost always lost. And I came to now, part of it, Hanover, New Hampshire is not New Haven. New Haven's it's a more cosmopolitan place. Hanover's a small town. People all knew each other. Attention in the press, they had the same reaction to attention in the press that snails have to salt. Ugh, it's just horrible. Likewise, I found Gail and Michael are much more sophisticated in these matters than I am, but business figures don't like the press. Tremendously, we had billionaires on the board. They hated the notion that the petition trustee process at Dartmouth College had come to the attention of the New York Times, and that the New York Times ran several articles on it and named people by name. It was just horrifying to them, which of course leads me back to the 70th, the book whose 70th anniversary we're celebrating, and Bill Buckley. That's what Bill did 70 years ago, that 70 years later, certain elements of your fine institution can't forgive him for. He went public. He named names. He identified courses and professors. And that to me is the hope for alumni, that we drag our beloved institutions into some form of democracy. We subject them to some form of real reporting and real journalism. I close with two notes for you, for the Yale audience. The two people who were most pleased by my winning my election as a Dartmouth petition trustee were George H.W. Bush, for whom I had worked many, many years ago, but he sent me a letter. He's now a former president. He sent me a letter out of nowhere saying, "Dear Peter, a cousin of mine is a Dartmouth man." Of course, the Bushes have cousins everywhere. "Cousin of mine is a Dartmouth man. He told me about you, what you've done. Good luck to you. I've long wished that we could get something like this going at my alma mater." And the other person was, of course, Bill Buckley. Bill was thrilled. He was just thrilled because to him it was some little piece, some little advance, some little continuation of the project that he had started 70 years ago. And that leads me to my final, can alumni and trustees change Yale? Can they change Dartmouth? I don't know. But these institutions are not businesses. We don't invest in them as long as we expect to profit. There is something deeper going on here. I remember Bill Buckley once said to me, he'd come from a dinner with George Bush, actually, and they'd been talking about Yale, and George Bush had said, "Bill," this is Bill reporting it to me, George Bush had said, "Bill, I'm all Yaled out. I just can't take it anymore." And Bill Buckley said, "Peter, can you imagine such a thing? Giving up on your college?" Of course, Bill was mistaken, as the letter from George Bush showed. But Bill Buckley's rule was, it is impermissible to give up on these institutions. Whether we can win or not, we fight. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. I just wanted to offer our panelists the opportunity to respond to anything the others have said. I also have some questions of my own, but Gail, Michael, do you want to weigh in?
I thought I might raise the question with my wonderful colleagues of the oasis, the beachhead, the alternative programs, some of which around the country have become really robust. The programs that will dare to bring the speakers that nobody else would allow. One hopes to institutions that would have the integrity to protect their right to do so. Programs that can have postdocs who can form relationships with students so that they have mentors, that they won't look at conservatives or classical liberals as some exotic species that one probably needs a hazmat suit to approach. And also a target for alumni that want to support their institution.
what Robbie George has done at Princeton, in my humble opinion, is the model for all of these institutions. It is a staggering accomplishment that he's done what he's done at the highest academic level. So he has done Princeton proud in some way. He's brought in money that would otherwise have refused to come into Princeton. And this is what Lauren is shrewd enough to keep an eye on, I'm sure. Being part of the Madison program at Princeton is cool. The kids like it. They want that on their resume. And as best I can tell, the Buckley program has the opportunity to get something like that, some sort of updraft like that going. But what Robbie did I once said to Robbie, told me the story about, I said to Robbie, when did it occur to you to do something like this? And he said, well, President Bowen, Bill Bowen, invited me to the president's house at Princeton, Prospect House, I think it's called. And he informed me that I had been granted tenure. And as I walked down the sidewalk away from the president's house at Princeton, I found myself thinking, what can I do to make them regret this for the rest of their lives?
That's wonderful. I was going to add, we've been in partnership with a program called Braver Angels that hosts student debates on campus. We've done almost 40 of these. And again, an opportunity to have something happening on campus that otherwise would not happen. My guess is the Buckley program may be the only one that would be willing to do this sort of thing. But it's a remarkable thing to see college students debate pro and con of keeping Confederate monuments, pro and con of assault weapons, pro and con of funding the police. And so far, we've never had an untoward incident. It's a kind of a training. And that, again, is one of the things that these special campus programs can really be the hub for.
So I'll turn to a few questions of my own. In an article titled Myth and Reality of University Trusteeship in the Post-Enron Era, Judge Jose Cabranes notes that the governing boards of private universities govern very little. He writes, except for approving annual budgets submitted by the university administration in omnibus form and supporting projects by their financial largesse, trustees play no role or a very limited role in major decisions that shape and define the vital purposes of a university. They play no role in deciding who will teach students or what they will be taught, or shaping programs of research and related activities using the university's resources. Do you agree with this assessment of the reality of trusteeship? And if so, is there anything that can and should be done to change the situation? And more broadly, what do you see as some of the responsibilities of trustees?
I can give you my experience.
That'd be great.
As I say, I served 8 years on the Dartmouth board. The general approach of not only was I a petition trustee, but I was the peasant trustee. I was by far the poorest. That in itself irked. And by the way, understandably, I can sort of see the point. That in itself irked some of my colleagues on the board, that there I was taking a seat on the board without a penny to contribute to the institution when money was the lifeblood of the place. Well, all right, fair enough. I could sort of see it was too late. I had the seat, but I could see their point. But here's the way an ideal board meeting goes. You show up, you discuss things that people who've made fortunes in business are comfortable discussing, largely budget. There are the president of the institution will come in with a few questions to ask for advice. And then you'll discuss the next fundraising campaign, next capital campaign. I'll give you an example. I was on a housing committee, And unlike Yale, which has so much money that all of your colleges are always in beautiful condition, and you've built a couple of new beautiful ones, at Dartmouth, we always have 8 decades of deferred maintenance. And so you, which dorm has to be dealt with over the next few years, or it will fall down. That kind of list. But we had a list, a priority, what the projects were going to be over the next 5 years, 10 years, and so forth. And at one point I said, listen, if you talk to faculty, get them in informal situations and say, rank the 5 best departments and rank the 5 worst departments on this college campus, you won't actually get that much variation. And what that means is there really is a consensus among the professionals who work and teach here about the problem of departments. Why is it unreasonable for us to ask for a plan to deal with these departments that's as rigorous as the plan we have to deal with dormitories? I got nowhere, just nowhere. Part of the response was, that's for the administration to handle. And the administration said, well, this is an institution of higher learning, and the American model is that departments run their own searches and they make their own tenure decisions, subject very loosely to final approval by the president of the institution. And then there was also, had an informal conversation. This is another thing that was kind of alarming, that a lot of the real meetings took place outside the actual meetings, with a college official who said, we can't possibly talk about the weaker departments in front of the full board of trustees because it'll leak and we'll have a terrible problem on our hands. Now, all those explanations struck me as understandable and to one extent or another valid. And B, I still to this day think it's outrageous that the board of trustees understood perfectly well that the institution knew which departments needed work and wasn't moving in a really rigorous, forthright way to address them. So Jose Cabranes, whose wife served on the Dartmouth board and whose son went to Dartmouth while I was a trustee, Judge Cabranes is correct about that. That is the fact, in my experience.
I think there are still some ways of breaching the walls that are ethical. What's said in privileged communication, which is often the case in a private board meeting, must be respected. But there are metrics out there that are very hard to ignore. The NSSE survey, the National Survey of Student Engagement, will show just how many hours students on average spend studying, partying, sleeping, whatever. It's really quite a remarkable report. And it's certainly possible that a board will just say to the trustee who has the temerity to point out that something doesn't look good here, to just be silent. I mean, that could happen. But one would hope that the people from the business world who understand metrics and understand data would want to take this to heart. Moreover, gadflies do sometimes get swatted or given a cup of hemlock, but gadflies can begin to wear down the defenses. And there is a duty of care legally for any board. And it's very hard to argue that the trustees have exercised their duty of care if they are not on top of academic performance, academic metrics of campus life as well. So I venture to say there's a place for this. In a public board, it's much easier because the press is in the room and there's disclosure of the documents. But even with a private board, I think there is some room.
I would agree with that. I think Michael is absolutely right, and I think even more broadly, if the things that Judge Cabranes wrote and that we've just discussed are true, why then do we have a board? What does it do? unless we're talking about the members' contributions. The board, and I think to some degree the administration, have a fiduciary responsibility to the institution. Now, again, I don't know what that means. To whom is that responsibility? Who is the institution? In order to carry that out, you have to have some means of vetting what management tells you they're doing, management being the administration. And I think the administration, what the board can do, for example, is to force the administration to disclose various states of things, like departments, like dormitories, like whatever, but to give a truthful account of what is going on at the university so that it can be evaluated by the board. And the board has a duty to evaluate it, to fulfill its responsibilities, and not just to rubber stamp, we would hope, although it may choose to rubber stamp, maybe it approves everything. But I think without that clear accounting by the administration being demanded by the board, we have nothing. We have no governance. That's what governance is. If you don't know what's happening, how can you assess it? And how can you make recommendations to change it or maintain it? And I don't see much of that. And I do respect the desire of a board to operate confidentially, because there are many confidential matters, like the traditional one is personnel. When evaluating the president's compensation, I imagine those conversations would always stay very private. All the boards that I've served on, there were many private things that were kept between four walls. But if the administration was ever, if management was ever not disclosing how things were working, what the finances were, who was doing a good job, who wasn't, what was a successful program, and why, the board has to, in these occasions, act like a client. You know, this is my company, what are you doing to it? I'm in charge of this company. I've got shareholders, or I've got customers out there. And I need to give them a fair accounting of what you're doing and what we're doing about it. And I don't know that relationship exists in university boards. And Peter, both of you really would know much more than I about that. But it's not something I see evidence of. One of you brought up the various programs at the different universities that have been endowed by not the wealthy liberals sitting on the board. And you know, we had an incident at Yale recently where a program had been endowed by a donor, and Yale had accepted the donation and had accepted the terms and had accepted the content of the program. And I think you can argue the merits of how much influence donors should have until the cows come home. Maybe you think it's a good thing, maybe you think they shouldn't be allowed to have that much influence. But once the university has accepted it, they've signed a contract, and they have to accept those terms. And I don't think that there was any question that Yale should have respected those terms and made decisions on who should teach and so on and so forth. The problem is it's a problem of management, really. Do you have a donor influence policy, a donor discretion policy? What is it? Be public about it. Tell us what it is. And then we won't be surprised whatever it is that you do. Or if you're not going to accept contributions that affect the content of the curriculum, then say so. And then no one will have a contribution accepted anymore. But you have to have something of a backbone to stand up and do those things, and that's how the trustees, I think, ought to be pretty exigent about management having that backbone. If you don't have a policy, get a policy and be public about it. If you saw a business running that way, it wouldn't run that way for much longer. And of course, this isn't a business, it's a private institution, but it still has stakeholders.
So a question that's come in from the audience is directed at Gail, but I think all of our panelists could comment on this. It says, given the obvious leftward, progressive, woke, and cancel culture bent, which has been troubling many of us for years, the obvious participation or tacit and sometimes explicit approval of Yale's president, can we assume that since these trends have been ongoing for so many years, that the situation meets with the approval of the Yale Corporation, or that the Yale Corporation does not believe it should actually take any role in the management of the university's direction?
Small note on that before I leave it to Gail and Michael for learned commentary. I'm thinking back now to my time on the Dartmouth board and to surprises, things that really shook me. And I think in particular, we had 3 billionaires on the board, none of whom had inherited his money, and a number of other people. These were extremely accomplished people who within their fields dominated entire verticals on the island of Manhattan. Amazing people. Intimidating people to me, and they were intimidated by the academics. They were intimidated by the academics. They gave deference to whatever. Oh, no, that's not the way a first-rate English department should be run. The chairman does this. Oh, if you say so, all right, if you say so. You're the doctorate. You know this. This is your discipline, not mine. It was astounding to me, but there is that going on.
Well, part of it comes back to the courage to have metrics. There are instruments like the collegiate learning assessment, which will show the value add in cognitive gain. And most schools are afraid to use them. Dare to demand that's a board policy issue. And we should be very clear, boards should not manage. Boards are there to set policy. A board can set a policy about intellectual diversity as well. It can issue its resolution, its statement, and in its role as the overseer of the president, it can demand explanations. That's the moment to ask, please explain why you handled the situation with the Christakises the way you did. We're not happy about this, or at least some of us are not happy about this. And even if it's a minority of the members of the board, maybe if it's only one, insist on that explanation. That is the board's role in evaluating the president. Can these things be turned around? It's very hard to say. They won't be turned around unless somebody's willing to challenge the dominant culture. And the board can do that in a few strokes. I've sort of forgotten now at Dartmouth and Yale, does the board approve tenures? Do those decisions have to come to the board?
No, that's a good question.
At some institutions, they do.
Certainly at Dartmouth, it was not. There were some decisions that got waived so quickly and so routinely that I honestly can't remember. There was a bundle of decisions that just in total deference to the decisions of the president. I can't recall whether officially the board always approved tenure decisions. Lord knows I should recall this. I just plain don't. But for sure, it was in effect in the hands of, in the first place, department chairs. Then if there was any trouble, the dean of the faculty, and then ultimately the president of the institution who intervened, and I served across two different presidents. Presidents did not like to intervene in tenure decisions. That would happen once or twice a year at the most, and only with the greatest reluctance when there was trouble of some kind that required the president to intervene.
It's a multi-million-dollar decision, and it most assuredly affects intellectual diversity.
Does it ever?
The process, if it's not intact and fair, could lead to enormous disgrace. Witness the issue of Casey Johnson at City University of New York, where it was in fact the board that overturned the academic establishment, discovering that there was gross politicization in attempting to keep this man out of the senior faculty. And it just occurs to me there are things the board can insist on. May we have a 2 to 3 page summary of the various levels of review? We want to look at that, not the 4 volumes of publications and so forth. We're not micromanagers, but we want to feel that this process is fair, that it's not politicized, that it has academic integrity, dare I say. And I do know of institutions that do it that way. Typically, there's not a lot of intervention, but there is oversight.
Yeah, I agree with both Michael and Peter on that it's not a case of saying, we want to review your decision on this person's tenure, or we want to tell you what policy you should have on such and such. No, they need to see the policy, and they need to see the process for making the tenure decisions, and see if they agree with those things, and so that any decision that the administration makes can be justified according to criteria that everyone understands.
There is, I can give you an example. You can tell me whether I made a terrible mistake. When I joined the board, heavily discouraged from going public in any matter, and so I didn't. And here's a question that I asked that within the board got nowhere. I simply said, I went to the Dartmouth College Handbook of 1979, the year I graduated, and I counted the number of people who had the word dean or provost in their titles. 6. About 1,000 kids graduated that year from Dartmouth College, tiny graduate programs. And the year I was elected to the board, 2005, I did the same thing. I went through the handbook. It was 33. There was a vice provost for this and a vice provost for that. So the number of deans and provosts had increased by not quite an order of magnitude, but by a lot. And the number of undergraduates had increased 10%. Question, why? Very rigorously, could we please examine the extent to which we require this bureaucracy because the federal government, among other entities, has layered on new regulations that we have to deal with, or because we have new legal issues, because the liability bar has gone after institutions. Maybe we need a few more, some provost overseeing. It may all be very reasonable, but why? How did this happen? Just got nowhere. I have the feeling that if I'd been maintaining a website, first of all, if I'd been maintaining a website, the rest of the board would have shunned me. But if I'd been maintaining a website, a lot of alums would have said, yeah, that's a perfectly good question. Why shouldn't you ask for answers to that question? So that's an example of what I encountered again and again when it was just piping up in the boardroom. The opportunity to get any place, I think over time, as the couple of presidents of the college and deans and provosts with whom I and the other petition candidates worked, as they discovered that we really did wish the good of Dartmouth College and we weren't crazy barbarians or Vikings, they did become more responsive and they did become more willing to work with us. But still in all, it was depending on their goodwill rather than being able to persuade the board to say, yeah, that's a good question. And here are another couple of questions we'd like to have answered within a period of a year. Hire McKinsey to go at it, or, all right, I've made my point. I agree entirely with Michael. even short of setting policy, just asking good questions and demanding answers can be very powerful.
Let me share just a little data point. We have a website called howcollegesspendmoney.com, into which we've imported all of the NCES federal data, IPEDS. This is totally the data that the schools themselves report to the federal government. So I just as we were talking, pulled up Yale University. Student services cost per student in 2020 were for Yale $28,650 compared to their recommended peer group of $9,071.
Staggering.
Now, yeah, what is going on? I would like somebody in the board of in the corporation room to put that on the screen and say, how is this to be explained? Maybe there are good reasons for it. We don't pass judgment, we just give data. But why? That's a lot of change. That's a lot more than our peers spend. Somebody please explain it. Is it our diversity office? Is it our counseling office? Is it our intramural sports? But that's going to be reflected in a tuition bill. So please explain. I'm amazed that a board would not do this when there's available information.
What is their risk if they do it? What happens to them if they ask provocative questions? Nothing should.
It sounds to me like duty of care.
Yeah. But that was the mystery that we were trying to solve, when we were saying that we don't understand what's driving the behavior and the reluctance to ask difficult questions. There's no barrier. They don't risk losing their jobs. They don't risk losing their title or any money.
And let me add another, if I may, radical suggestion, which could be a policy issue. No search committee would ever be composed entirely of white males. It would be an incredible scandal. The poli-sci department search committee for a new associate professor was entirely made up of Caucasian males. Why is it okay, for example, for the econ department, as happens in many places, to be completely without somebody who's steeped in Austrian economics or free market economics or as a classical liberal? Why is that okay? I know it would be hard for them to find a Republican to put on the committee. I'm not exactly exaggerating, but why is it okay not to have robust intellectual diversity in those places where the composition of the faculty is going to be determined? And that could be a board discussion. How do we have intellectual diversity? Somebody needs to throw down the gauntlet.
So another question that's come in from the audience is, why not go out and start and fund new colleges like the University of Austin, or support the Hillsdale, St. John's, Claremont McKenna's? And this relates to a question I had about, some commentators argue nowadays that our elite institutions are broken beyond repair, and instead of spending our time and treasure trying to reform them, we need to focus on building new institutions, as this questioner notes. I'd love to get your thoughts on that topic.
I myself have thought about that one a lot. Larry Arnn, the president of Hillsdale, is a good friend. I myself am a Catholic, and I am thrilled by the emergence and excellence of a number of small Catholic institutions. Joe Lonsdale and Neil Ferguson, both of whom are involved in the new University of Austin, are good friends of mine. I know these people, and I wish them well. And my answer on long reflection is, the first part of the answer is almost trite, but still worth saying. It's a great, big, rich country, and there ought to be room for all kinds of institutions. That's the first part of the answer. The second part of the answer, it goes back to well, it really just, it goes back to Bill, that somehow or other, for some reason we can't really explain, it is irrational, not irrational, but irrational. Those of us who went through these institutions entered into a heritage. And it is not subject, we are not permitted to reject it. We are just not permitted to do that. That the connection is more filial and familial than it is businesslike or political. You love Yale. Lord knows I can't imagine why, but you do love Yale, and that imposes duties on you. And I love Dartmouth, and I am therefore duty bound. That's the only answer I can offer.
Peter, I think it's a good one. I was thinking about the same thing because I've seen all of these new things coming along. I think they should. I think it's wonderful. But there is something to be said for tradition, reputation, heritage, as you said. And I know that and a reverence for the things of our culture that have contributed to civilization. And when you take music history, if it hasn't been obliterated like the art history course at Yale was, because it was Western art, you have to study Western music. And the reason is because no one else had any notation for a long time. You don't know what it sounded like. You can't go study music from other parts. And there's value in that. It doesn't mean that you don't have any respect for any other culture or any other developments, but we have a unique university system that those of us who have spent time in Europe know that you don't find anywhere else. I've certainly found Oxbridge very surprising. It's not nearly as broad-minded a context as what we have, and we all know that the continent directs people into various areas early in life. But when you're 18 years old in the United States, you get a great big ice cream cone. You get to walk onto this beautiful campus where you can do anything you want. You can study anything that you want. And my undergraduate college, Cornell Arts and Sciences, Ezra Cornell founded the place by saying, I want to found it. I find it very emotional. I want to found a university where any person can study anything. And that's what he did. You can study anything, things you probably wouldn't want to study. But it's all there in one place. I'm sorry, I'm embarrassing myself. But we offer this independent environment where you can just go and turn into the person you're going to be by examining anything you want to examine and by not facing criticism for the way that you approach it. Your view on something should be as respected as anyone else's view, provided you can explain it. And my husband did all of his university studies in France, and he did much of his what we would call high school studies with the Jesuits. And they always said to him, all of us here, it was his first philosophy course, all of us here are very open. And of course, we'd all prefer that you believe in God or Christ or what have you, but we know you may not, and it's okay if you don't, as long as you can explain your thinking. Mm-hmm. That's all we care about in this place. Just learn how to explain your thinking, know what you think, and be able to explain why you do. And we had a university system that existed to help people do that in this wonderful setting that's unique anywhere in the world. And I don't think we can leave that bereft either. I think we've got to support it and bring it back to the way it was.
I agree entirely. We have treasures in this nation, and we must not abandon those treasures. We need to fix them. I love University of Austin. Pano Kanellis is an extraordinary person, but we came out of extraordinary universities. We've got to take upon ourselves the course corrections.
We have a few of you have brought up the subject of alumni giving in your comments, and we have a question here from the audience saying withholding $11 billion sounds like it would be sufficient to prompt change, but since it is unlikely that anything like universal participation would be achieved, and given the magnitude of Yale's endowment, how likely is it that the Yale Corporation would do anything other than prompting Yale's president to pay some lip service to how disappointed the university is with the boycott, much less prompt the Yale Corporation to even acknowledge it? And I would add to that from my own research, you know, in the case of Yale, declining alumni participation in giving has already happened. And it doesn't seem to have prompted any kind of change in behavior. In fact, alumni participation in giving was at 47% in the 1990s, and today it's much closer to 25%. So I would just be curious to hear from you all further on that subject.
But of course, my short answer is I don't care what you guys do with your money. I just return 2 points. One, a handful of billionaires who are down with a progressive program will make up for thousands of ordinary alums who wish to withhold money. It may be noble and it may be useful. I don't know. It may be useful, but there's a good reason to doubt that it would be truly useful. Point 1 of 2. Here's point 2 of 2. It's what Gail just said. Actions are one thing, but these institutions are devoted to the life of the mind. And the people who run them, with whom we disagree in many ways, still consider themselves articulate and rational. For alumni to withhold money is one thing. For them to speak, to articulate their reasoning, to support good reporting. The questions that Michael was suggesting that members of the Yale Corporation ask the administration, those are questions that good reporters can address. So I just feel in one way or another, I don't have a formulated or a crystallized answer. But who's the new Bill Buckley? Who's the new kid? Who's the new Yale kid who's going to report on this situation? It just seems to me that what is necessary is less. Again, I don't mean to denigrate it. It may be, I don't know Yale well enough. It may be that if enough alums withhold their money, that really will have an effect. But I still doubt very much that it will have as useful an effect as finding voices.
I think that's a great point.
I see room for both, and I would not call it a boycott. It's a redirection. Not trying to flatter my host, but what if the Buckley program were able to become an enormous presence? There's the new Elm Street program at Yale as well. What if there are these vibrant alternatives that enrich the campus rather than go into the general fund? I throw that out as a possibility, combined with the recognition. I think what I'm hearing you say, Peter, is ideas have consequences, which they most assuredly do. And the combination of the two could be very powerful. Schools worry about their reputations properly. And it is not my intention to see my alma mater besmirched, but I think we do need to criticize it when it is off track. And we've seen it get badly off track. And one of the ways that we really can do the course correction is to build the programs that will change the culture.
So in a November 1951 review of God and Man at Yale, in the Atlantic, Mick George Bundy attacked the book, and he wrote as follows of Buckley. His personal view of what a university should be is, of course, his own business, but in urging alumni control of Yale's educational policy, he's absolutely wrong, both on the law and on Yale tradition. His basic argument is that because the alumni pay the piper, they should call the tune. Of course, any alumnus who disapproves of what Yale is doing may urge changes, and equally, of course, he may cast his vote as he pleases for the minority of elected members of the corporation. Obviously, he can also send his money and his sons to other institutions if he pleases. So, reading this passage today, I'm struck by the sentence about how dissatisfied alumni can express that dissatisfaction through the Yale Corporation election. We talked about the cancellation of the petition process, and it's also, I would say it's challenging to argue that the election was even prior to the cancellation, that the election was really gave alumni much of a voice for two reasons. It was so difficult to get a spot on the ballot, and as we've discussed, any discussion of issues was prohibited, and the candidates were asked to stay silent. So I guess my broader question would be, what role, if any, should alumni play in electing trustees? If you were to create a governance model for Yale or any of these institutions, how would you shape alumni involvement?
Let me push back if I, go ahead, Gail.
But if not necessary, Michael, but thank you. I think there's there's one very clear view one could express on that, which is these are people walking around with Yale or Dartmouth or whatever degrees, and they want those degrees to stand for something that they stand for themselves, the reason that they went and got them when they did. Like Peter, I had people from all sides of the spectrum call me upset with the decision, and they were not from one political side of the aisle or the other. Mm-hmm. All perspectives were represented, and I didn't hear a single one of them say that they wanted to take Yale down. They were all interested in supporting the institution because they loved it, and but some of them were quite stark in the way they announced that they were going to withdraw any gifts that they had promised to Yale, and that was over until things changed, until the Woodward principles were accepted, et cetera, et cetera.
I was thinking that McGeorge Bundy seemed to be suffering from that problem of vision that I started with, that he seemed to blur the image of the alumnus with a checkbook. And it is crucial that all of us recognize that we and our fellow alumni are guardians of values, not just guardians of our bank accounts to be shared with our alma mater. And that we are the ones that can share those values that were so important in shaping us with the institution as it currently exists. Another little factoid, we do a survey every year of core curriculum requirements of over 1,100 schools. Only 18% of them have a requirement for a basic course in American history and government. Now, Derek Bach and Ron Daniels have called for such an important part of every undergraduate's education. And most alumni that I speak with of my own generation say, well, I had a requirement like that. Everybody did that. So where do we lose that? And alumni can be a crucial part of restoring it, especially at institutions not quite as deep-pocketed as Dartmouth and Yale. If you've got $5 million to give, endow a chair in the American founding and put some guardrails in the language of the gift agreement to make sure it stays intact. These are strategies for changing the culture for the better.
Provided the university has a policy that allows them to accept those contributions with guardrails.
Well, Harvard has pretty much said no. Yale was going in that direction, but seems to have pulled back. And the bottom line for any donor is, it's your money. If the school doesn't want to meet your conditions, then they're free to walk away. You're free to walk away. One hopes that actually more schools can be like University of Vermont and get a chair in free enterprise in the state of Bernie Sanders.
I don't know why I've been so slow to see this, but I'd like to say to all the 90 or so people listening, if you're unhappy with Yale, there's a little college in Hanover, New Hampshire that will be delighted to take your contribution. Why I've missed that until now, I don't know. Honestly, the more I think about Yale, I'm the man to talk to on December 31st because I'm really good at what other people should make as their New Year's resolutions. So I think I've just got Yale figured out. Withholding contributions is not a bad idea as long as there's a specific demand that is being made of the institution. The specific demand here is to reinstate some reasonable petition process. I'm less familiar with, I remember the Woodward study, but I'm dim on that, but maybe to accept those as well. And then as long as something is being built, I would hope it's the Buckley program because I'm so devoted to Bill's memory. But that idea, I want to take it back a little bit. Withholding contributions, as long as they're connected to something specific, something actionable, as long as you're using the opportunity of alumni reaching out to each other, they only do reach out to each other after a certain point in years, as the years go by, when they get really angry. It's very hard to tap into that latent love for the institution because it's the 12th most important thing on any given day. First our families, then this, paying the mortgage or doing a deal if you're on Wall Street. It's there, but it's difficult to tap into. But there are moments when alums are willing to come together. And as long as you're collecting names and putting together connections, I sort of want to withdraw my suggestion that withholding money might not be a good idea. It might be quite useful. That's all.
Well, we have just a couple of minutes left, so I just in closing wanted to ask all of you, is there any advice that you would give to trustees who are grappling with the various concerns that we've spoken about this afternoon? Whether it's that they're concerned about the state of free speech on campus, ballooning bureaucracy, and any other issue, and also, how can those trustees navigate that effectively, especially if their point of view is not the majority view shared by the board?
Well, I was going to suggest dare to find out. Actually, it's a question, Lauren. Has any member of the corporation ever sat down with you for conversation?
No.
Yeah. Trustees ought to be roaming the campus. Their information ought not to be filtered through the boardroom. They have an obligation to report back to the president and to their colleagues what they find, but are they willing to do that kind of engagement? And certainly I would hope that any college president would encourage trustees to come to know the institution that way, be kicking the tires and checking the pressure. And make that offer, please, Lauren. All members of the corporation, I'd like to talk with you about intellectual diversity. Are you willing?
I'm so tempted to suppose the current members of the Yale Corporation are already just so bought into the institutional structure and so hunkered down in a kind of joint, so circled up in defense that who knows what could be said to help those poor people who run your great university. I do have a word for any current undergraduates or recent alums. It won't take many of you, but some number of you really need to become billionaires. Honestly, that really is a serious piece of advice. Don't twist your life out of shape if you're not put on this earth to do that kind of thing. But some of you, it really does help in appealing to these institutions to have a wallet that's thick.
That always helps in appealing to anybody, actually. I do think, I think it was Michael who brought it up a little earlier. What is to prevent Yale or anywhere else from insisting on insisting on the attainment of a level of intellectual diversity in various areas? And I would answer that with, well, that doesn't seem to be a goal right now, and I don't know why. I don't know the answers to these questions. I continually get fundraising pleas from the Yale Graduate School telling me about all the accomplishments of recent years, and it's all about research, and the research all focuses on what people would see as today's, what I suppose their primary audience would see as today's social justice issues. And however far-fetched that is for the discipline in question, it's there. And they seem to be touting their focus on all of these, on that issue, on the discours du jour, you know. And why intellectual diversity wouldn't be as important as that, I don't know. And nobody has given me a good answer to that question. I'm sorry the Board of Trustees isn't seeking that answer, but I think they should.
Well, we are unfortunately out of time, but I want to thank all three of you for this wonderful discussion this afternoon, and I want to thank everyone who attended and asked questions. We really appreciate it, and for those who are interested in more of these conversations that we're having this week, we still have two coming up, one tomorrow, Thursday, and then one on Friday. So you can go to buckleyprogram.com to learn more and sign up. So thank you so much to everyone, and have a great evening.
Thank you, Lauren.
Lauren, thank you. Gail and Michael, a pleasure to meet you, if only remotely.
Likewise.
Gail, whoever is calling you really wants to talk.
I'm so sorry.
No. Thank you. Lauren, thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, Lauren, thank you for having us.
Great pleasure to be with you all.
It's an honor to be here.
Wonderful. Well, thanks so much. All right. Have a great evening.
Okay. You too, Lauren. Bye.